if your body didn't immediately intervene, the completely normal lunch you just ate, maybe a turkey sandwich and a side of fruit, it actually contains enough potassium to trigger a fatal heart attack before you even finish digesting it.
Yeah, it's wild.
Right. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are opening up a pretty dense medical text to explore how your kidneys juggle the essential electrolytes that keep you alive millisecond by millisecond. We're talking potassium, calcium, phosphate, and magnesium.
And the margins of error your body operates on are, well, they're terrifyingly narrow. While electrolyte regulation might sound like something you only think about when grabbing a sports drink after a run, I mean, this microscopic balancing act is the absolute bedrock of your survival.
And reading through these sources, the sheer scale of that balancing act is just staggering.
Oh, absolutely.
So the mission for today is to figure out exactly how your body diffuses these daily dietary time bombs. And, what happens when this incredible microscopic chemical laboratory just breaks down?
Let's start with the immediate threat, which is potassium.
Right. And to understand how the kidneys sort it out, we first have to look at the blood.
Exactly. Let's put the numbers into perspective because raw medical measurements rarely do it justice. So in your extracellular fluid, which includes your blood plasma floating around your organs, right now, potassium levels are strictly clamped down at about 4.2 milliequivalents per liter.
Which is tiny.
It is. If that level rises by just a shift of like 3 to 4 milliequivalents, the electrical signaling in your heart gets completely chaotic. You develop severe arrhythmias.
Wow.
And a little higher, and the heart simply stops. Cardiac arrest.
But the wild part is the sheer volume of potassium hiding inside your own tissue.
Yeah, that's the kicker.
According to the text, a normal 70-kilogram adult has nearly 70 times more potassium locked away inside their cells than they do floating in their blood. Like 3920 inside and only 59 outside.
Okay, let's unpack this. It's kind of like your blood is a really small nightclub with a strict fire marshal capacity limit.
Okay, I like this. Right, so if even one extra person sneaks in, the fire marshal shuts the whole club down, which in this case is a heart attack.
That is actually a highly accurate way to visualize it. The trillions of cells making up your body act as this massive distributed storage vault. They hold over 98% of your total body potassium.
So keeping with this nightclub analogy, when you, the listener, sit down and eat a big lunch, a massive party bus suddenly pulls up. Dozens of new guests, a huge influx of dietary potassium arrive at the club doors all at once.
They want to get in.
Exactly. If they all walk onto the main floor into your blood, it's game over. So the body employs aggressive bouncers, and the text identifies these bouncers as insulin and epinephrine or, adrenaline.
Right, beta-adrenergic stimulation.
Yeah. The second you eat, these bouncers grab the new potassium guests and immediately shove them into this massive, cavernous VIP lounge, which is the inside of your cells, crisis averted. And then, between meals, those bouncers just let a few molecules trickle back out onto the main floor to keep the numbers perfectly balanced.
What's fascinating here is that it's an incredibly elegant evolutionary failsafe. I mean, we almost universally associate insulin with blood sugar regulation, right?
Yeah, totally.
But biology paired them together for a reason. When our ancestors found food, say an apple, they absorbed sugar and potassium simultaneously.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. So using the exact same hormone, insulin, to quickly pack both of them safely into the cells at the exact same time is just a masterpiece of efficiency. It physically turns on cellular pumps that vacuum potassium out of the blood.
Which makes me think about millions of people living with type 1 diabetes. So if insulin is the bouncer, what happens to people with type 1 diabetes who lack insulin when they eat a big fruit salad? Are they missing that failsafe?
That's exactly the reality they navigate. Without supplemental insulin injections, diabetic patients experience a much greater, highly dangerous rise in plasma potassium after a meal.
Because the bouncer isn't there.
Right. The doors to the vault are essentially locked, and the potassium has nowhere to go. But a missing hormone isn't the only way this system gets compromised. Anything that physically damages the cellular vault or chemically jams the doors open can send that hidden potassium flooding back out.
I imagine sheer physical trauma would do that. Like if you're in a car crash and suffer a severe crush injury to your leg muscles.
Absolutely.
All those millions of crushed muscle cells are just popping open like water balloons, dumping their potassium reserve straight into the bloodstream.
Yes, severe cell damage is a classic trigger for hyperkalemia, or hypotassium. But you can also stress the vault without breaking it. Strenuous, exhaustive, extreme exercise pulls potassium out.
Wait, really? Just working out?
Yeah, extreme exercise can dangerously force it out.
Yeah.
Or consider metabolic acidosis, when your blood becomes slightly too acidic. The excess acid physically interferes with those cellular pumps, essentially drugging the bouncers, going with your analogy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they slow down, and potassium gets trapped outside in the dangerous zone.
Okay, so the cellular VIP lounge is a brilliant temporary fix. It buys us time after a meal. But the cells can't hold on to that extra potassium forever.
No, they can't.
Eventually, it has to be physically removed from the body, which means it's time for the kidneys to go to work. How do the kidneys actually physically remove it from the blood?
Well, the kidneys filter an astronomical amount of fluid. Picture a sprawling, microscopic plumbing system. As your blood fluid travels through these twisting tubes, your body is constantly reclaiming what it needs and leaving what it doesn't to become urine.
Right.
Right at the beginning of this journey, in an area called the proximal tubule and a structure shaped like a hairpin drop called the loop of Henle, the kidney just automatically sucks almost 90% of the filtered potassium right back into the blood.
Yeah, and I got stuck on this point in the reading. If the whole goal is to get rid of the dangerous potassium from our lunch, why is the kidney immediately grabbing 90% of it and putting it back in the blood?
Biology is inherently conservative. I mean, the body prefers to hoard all resources by default, keeping a large baseline, and then leave the absolute precision fine-tuning for the very end of the line.
Oh, fair.
So that fine-tuning happens in the final stretch of the plumbing, in the late distal and cortical collecting tubules. Here you have these specialized units called principal cells doing the heavy lifting.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I am picturing these principal cells as a crew of workers frantically bailing water out of a sinking boat.
That works.
The boat is your blood, and the ocean outside is the urine. And the text describes a very specific two-step bailing process. First, on the side of a cell touching your blood, they have a mechanical pump, the Na plus -K plus ATPase pump, that yanks the potassium out of the blood and pulls it inside the principal cell.
Exactly.
And then on the far side of the cell facing the urine, they have these microscopic trapdoors with wild names like ROM-K and high conductance BK channels. The potassium just passively leaks out of those trapdoors to be flushed away.
Right, it's pure diffusion at that point. Because that pump creates such an artificially high, dense concentration of potassium inside the principal cell, the natural laws of physics just push it out through those open trapdoors into the fluid to be excreted.
But how do these principal cell workers know when to bail faster and when to stop? Like, is there a manager barking orders at them? They can't see the big picture of what I ate?
You're looking for the manager, and in the system, the manager is a hormone called aldosterone.
Aldosterone, okay.
It's secreted by the adrenal glands sitting right on top of your kidneys. And aldosterone is extraordinarily sensitive. An increase in your blood plasma potassium of just 3 milliequivalents per liter, barely a blip, can spike your aldosterone levels tenfold.
Tenfold, just from 3 milliequivalents.
Yep. When aldosterone arrives at those principal cells, it essentially grabs a megaphone. It forces the pumps to work harder, and it physically inserts more of those trapdoors, those channels, into the cell wall.
So if this manager is so critical to survival, it sounds like a terrifying single point of failure. Like, what if the manager goes missing? If the adrenal gland gets sick and stops producing aldosterone, like in Addison disease, the manager is gone. The workers stop bailing, the boat floods, and the potassium builds up.
To lethal levels, yes. Addison disease leads to a lethal potassium buildup. And we see the exact opposite when the manager goes rogue in Conn syndrome, where a tumor might cause the adrenal gland to pump out massive, endless amounts of aldosterone.
So they just keep bailing.
Exactly. The manager forces the workers to bail out potassium nonstop until the body is dangerously depleted, paralyzing the muscles.
Wow. That sets up a fascinating conflict. We have this beautifully evolved, hypersensitive aldosterone system that perfectly manages our potassium. But then we introduce the modern world. The text spends a lot of time on an evolutionary mismatch regarding our diet.
It does. For the vast majority of human history, our ancestors ate a diet incredibly rich in potassium and virtually devoid of added sodium. The text contrasts our modern diet with the Yanomamo tribe in the Amazon basin as a living example.
Right, the hunter-gatherers.
Exactly. They eat an evolutionary diet, huge amounts of fruits, roots, and vegetables. Their potassium intake is massive, And their sodium intake is a tiny, tiny fraction of an average modern person's.
Because sodium salt is primarily dumped into our food through modern industrial processing and preservation.
Right. Our human kidneys evolved over millions of years to constantly, desperately dump potassium and ruthlessly hoard every tiny crystal of sodium they could find. The modern industrialized diet completely flipped that script. We consume staggering amounts of sodium and very little potassium.
Okay, so let's put you, the listener, in this scenario. You hit a drive-thru and eat a giant bag of incredibly salty French fries. That huge hit of sodium suppresses your aldosterone, right?
Normally, yes.
Because your body knows it has way too much salt, so it tells the manager to go to sleep. But if the manager's asleep, shouldn't those principal cells stop bailing out potassium? Shouldn't a high-sodium diet cause our internal potassium to build up and kill us?
You would logically assume that, but the kidney has a mechanical backup system that is nothing short of brilliant. Yes, a high-sodium diet suppresses aldosterone, which should trap potassium, but all that excess salt also pulls extra water into your kidney's plumbing.
Okay.
It drastically increases the sheer physical flow rate of fluid rushing through those kidney tubules.
Like turning a garden hose from a trickle to full blast?
Exactly. That rushing microscopic river does two things. First, it continuously flushes away any potassium that is leaked out. Second, the raw physical mechanical force of that fast-flowing fluid literally blows open those high-conductance BK trapdoors we talked about. They are flow activated.
Wait, so the high flow rate perfectly cancels out the low aldosterone?
It completely counterbalances it, yes.
The rushing river pulls the potassium out anyway. But that brings up a glaring contradiction. If the high flow rate perfectly handles the potassium and our excretion stays normal, why do all the doctors tell you a high sodium, low potassium diet is bad for you?
Because surviving isn't the same as thriving. I mean, the kidneys can successfully excrete the potassium, but the combined strain of low potassium and high sodium dramatically increases your risk for hypertension, stroke, and chronic kidney disease.
It's like running your car's engine at max RPMs on the highway. Sure, the car's moving forward, but you are slowly blowing the engine block to pieces.
That's a great way to put it. The text notes that a diet rich in potassium physically protects against the vascular damage of high sodium. It forces the blood vessels to relax. This explains why ancient, unindustrialized populations like the Yanomamo don't experience the progressive, age-related blood pressure spikes that we see in the modern world.
We are fighting millions of years of our own evolutionary biology every time we open a bag of chips.
We really are.
But, potassium is just the electrical signal. It's the spark. To actually keep your muscles from twitching and your physical skeleton intact, the kidneys have to manage calcium and phosphate with just as much precision. And that brings us to the calcium and phosphate teeter-totter.
The stakes for calcium are arguably just as high as potassium. The amount of free, active calcium in your extracellular fluid is clamped tightly at about 2.4 milliequivalents per liter.
Again, incredibly tight margins.
Very tight. If it drops too low a state called hypocalcemia, you develop spastic muscle contractions known as hypocalcemic tetany. If it spikes too high, it causes arrhythmias.
And unlike potassium, which hides in our soft tissue cells, 99% of our calcium is stored out in the open. It's in our bones. So if my blood calcium drops, the body needs to tap the bone vault.
Right.
The text says the parathyroid glands are the master regulator here. But the parathyroid glands are way up in your neck. How do they extract calcium from a femur bone down in your leg?
They have to send a messenger. That messenger is parathyroid hormone, or PTH. When calcium drops, they flood the system with PTH, which launches a multi-pronged attack. First, it breaks down bone to release calcium. Second, it increases vitamin D activation to absorb more from your gut.
Okay.
And finally, it goes to the kidneys and forces the distal tubules to reabsorb more calcium back into the blood.
But bone isn't just made of pure calcium. It's made of calcium and phosphate bound together. If you dissolve the bone, you get a surge of both. So what happens to the phosphate?
The kidneys manage phosphate by an overflow mechanism. Anything over a specific threshold simply spills into the urine. And what's fascinating is that PTH, our messenger, actually stops the kidneys from reabsorbing phosphate.
So what does this all mean? It sounds like calcium and phosphate are sitting on a teeter-totter in the blood, and PTH is the kid jumping on the calcium side to lift it up, while actively dumping the phosphate side into the trash.
You've got the mechanism exactly right. If PTH released all that calcium from the bone, but allowed the phosphate to stick around, the two would just bind right back together. By dumping the phosphate, PTH ensures the calcium remains free and active.
Which makes me wonder, does our blood's acidity affect calcium the same way it affects potassium? We talked about acidosis earlier.
Yes, but the text points out a really fascinating detail about alkalosis, which is low acidity. Alkalosis increases the amount of calcium that gets bound up by plasma proteins.
Wait, so the proteins just snatch it up?
Exactly. Because of the change in electrical charge, the proteins bind the calcium. This means there's less free active calcium floating around, which makes patients with alkalosis highly susceptible to severe muscle spasms or tetany.
So if you, the listener, have ever had a panic attack and started hyperventilating, you are breathing out carbon dioxide, pulling acid out of your blood, causing alkalosis.
And your hands might cramp up or tingle?
That is wild. You gave yourself temporary tetany just by breathing too fast. Okay, so we've covered 3 major electrolytes, but there's a final piece to this intricate puzzle that behaves a bit differently: the magnesium mystery.
Yes, magnesium is crucial. It's mostly stored in bones and inside cells, with less than 1% in the extracellular fluid. The kidneys excrete about 10 to 15% of the filtered load.
And unlike the other ions where the distal tubule is the main regulator, the text says 65% of magnesium is primarily reabsorbed earlier in the loop of Henle.
That's right. Anatomically, it is processed earlier.
But I observed that magnesium seems to quietly piggyback on the calcium systems. Like many factors that alter calcium excretion also alter magnesium excretion.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, magnesium activates so many enzymes. Because it activates those enzymes, its balance is the silent engine running all the other cellular pumps we've talked about today.
Wow, so it's the battery.
It is the battery. Without magnesium, the Na plus CADK plus ATPase pumps we talked about, they can't function. The whole system would collapse.
That is incredible. When you step back, you realize the kidney isn't just a filter. It's a highly sensitive chemical laboratory constantly negotiating with our diet, hormones, and lifestyle.
It really is a masterclass in dynamic equilibrium. And I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder that isn't directly answered in the text.
Oh, I love these.
If high fluid flow rates through the kidney tubules, like from a high-sodium diet, naturally force open those BK potassium channels, could future medicine develop a way to artificially stimulate that flow rate dynamically?
Oh, wow.
Imagine a treatment that mimics the biological benefits of the Yanomamo hunter-gatherer kidney function without us having to abandon modern food entirely. Manipulating those fluid dynamics could be revolutionary.
Using physics to solve a modern dietary problem. I love that. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. So the next time you eat a banana, take a second to think about the microscopic bouncers and cellular vaults at work. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.